Good morning, everyone. I'm Gabby Mendes, the Executive Coordinator of the Local Government Leadership Academy. Welcome to LGLA's presentation of How to Rock Your Next Video Call. We are living in a new world where we need to get our point across virtually and learn how to enhance our personal presence in this online space, which may or may not come naturally to many of us. In our webinar, Jan will share tips, tools, and tricks to help us boost our virtual presence and our ability to get our point across to improve communications with our colleagues and community. Jan Enns is a well-known conference and workshop presenter with 25 years of experience both online and off. She has a master's degree in communications and a certificate in local government administration, has taught citizen engagement online for U of Alberta, is a founder and instructor for LGMA's learning webinars, and of course, a familiar face and a regular instructor at Local Government Leadership Academy. It's my pleasure today to welcome Jan Enns in LGLA's webinar production of How to Rock Your Next Video Call.
Super. Thanks, Gabby, so much. I think you have some instructions as well you wanted to share.
Yes, so our webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to everyone after the event. Both the chat and the question and answer functions are open. The chat function is more for observations and communications with the group, and the question and answer is for your technical questions that you may have for the presenter, which we will cover at the end after the actual presentation.
Super. Thanks, Gabby. Good to know that information. And just to confirm, we've got a couple polls built in today's webinar just to make it a little more interactive and engaging. And I want to make sure that everybody has the instructions. You can fill in the polls both by text, using your text on your iPhone, for example, or by opening a tab on your laptop or desktop. You simply, to text, go to text messaging on your phone, open a new message, and in the to line, type in 37607. And then when the message pops up, that's where you type in Jan Enns 654. Then as the questions will appear on your iPhone, you'll be able to fill in your answer there. And from an internet, from the tab on your browser, just go to pollev.com, enter Jan Enns 654 when you're prompted, and then again when you're prompted with the question, you'll be able to answer your response there. And as Gabby said, if you have any questions, by all means, just type them into the chat. And Adrian and, Gabby is available to give you a hand there as well. So let's get started. We're going to cover off a lot in the next hour. And again, there's 15 minutes for questions and answers after, and I'm more than happy to stay through the after as well to answer any additional questions. But our world has really changed as we've moved on, and there's some things that we want to learn today that can really help us build that connection that we need to make. This is a connection that we do so naturally when we're in person. Arjun, I've seen you make eye contact and shake hands with people. But just in this last while, we've gone from it was the beginning of March when we had the UBCM workshops on the gas tax funding, and we were still shaking hands and hugging. I was a bit of a hugger. And just the following week, we were off to 6 feet apart. It happened so fast. And you folks, I believe in local government, have been doing an awesome job of making that transition. We're going to talk about the following things today in our webinar about that it will really help us move forward. And that is how to make that connection through our lens, how to get light on our face, what we can do about mastering our audio, our backdrop, our wardrobe, what we're wearing. I know you probably can't see it too well, but I have my special Bonnie Henry pins on today, big fan. And also a little bit about Vidicet, about our manners, and finally about looking after us, how we can own this as we move forward. So as I said, we've joined some of the 4.7 million Canadians that have made the transition from working in the office to working from home. And a lot of this includes the very important work you do around governance. And I've seen local governments embrace this. The folks at Castlegar got right on it. There's Mayor Tassoni, you know, everybody waving hi, and some cheerful faces there as we move forward. But as you can well imagine, as we move into this new forum, we are also experiencing a few hiccups, right? And I love this story. The virtual council brings strange sounds, unflattering angles, and the inability to mute to light. And that results in a whole bunch of challenges for us. First off, we want to make that good connection when we get online. It takes 3 to 5 seconds to make that first impression. And according to Amy Cuddy, author of Presence, How to Bring Your Boldest, Best Self to the Forefront, she says that in that 3 to 5 seconds, people are assessing us. They're assessing us to see how trustworthy we are and how capable we are. And boy, we want to come across as our utmost, especially as local government leaders. This is so important to where we're headed. So we're going to talk a bit about that today and how to manage those, because this is here to stay. What I want to do is start with our first poll here, and I'd like you to scooch up to your computer or your iPhone, and in one word, how do you feel about being on camera for video calls? So grab your iPhone, type it in, and we'll see what we come up with. This is a word cloud. So if you see a word come up there, you can, and you like it, then you can promote it, like type it in again, like you might type in intimidated again, or good, or ugh, I like that one. Awkward, right? So there's all kinds of things there. So lots of different answers. Awkward, intimidated, it's unexpected, right? How do we manage this space, this virtual space? What are people seeing? What are we seeing as we move forward? Awesome. Yuck. Strange. Unexpected. Fine. Good. Okay. So let's continue then. It's about having those great ideas and being able to get them across. What we're going to cover, we talked about that. I think the important thing as well here is that this is here to stay. There's been a recent survey that was just issued by Steve Mossop and the folks over at Insight West. And they were saying that as much as 1/3 of folks are not ready to come back to work. They're not ready to go back into the offices. And about half, I think it was about 40 some odd percent, are not comfortable with coming back to the office. So not only are they not ready, if they are going to go back, they're not comfortable. So we need to think about how are we going to keep this practice as an ongoing piece. So that's why it's even more important that we work to build connections, that we overcome some of those challenges, and we do that in advance. At worst, it's a funny thing that happens. It from then progresses to a distraction, so we're not paying attention, to an annoyance, to it can also be a waste of time as everyone is sitting around the room waiting for a few people to finish up. So let's look at how we can create that. Let's start with one of the first tips, and that is what I call level your lens. Now, we've had about couple months of this online stuff, and I'm always amazed when I watch on council or board meetings the number of people that are showing half their face, so they're over here doing something, or their ear, or their nose, or their top of their head. Well, trust me, it's distracting, but also no one really wants to see our nose hairs or our gray hairs. Yes, I get my COVID cut tomorrow. I can't wait. I don't know how you folks have been doing. So it's really important to level your lens. The best position for your lens is to have it pointing sort of to your third eye, in between your eyebrows, as opposed to having it too low or too high. So that's my first tip. I'm going to share with you an example of how you can achieve that by using a boom and your desktop. So here's an example with a colleague of mine, and I've got my lens. As you can see, I've got a separate USB camera. I'm not just using the one on my laptop, but I certainly could. This is just a higher quality, and I do this for a living. So I've got that a lot more equipment. And I will share you a list with you of the equipment as well. I've got mine on a boom and I'm able to position it to where I want it. Now, the best part is that I'm able to take the screen on my desktop and go to this little tab here and minimize it. When I do that, I can actually move the minimize screen right under my lens. What that allows me to do is get the feedback of their non-verbal communication by looking at them in the eye on screen. But because it's right under my lens, it looks like I'm looking directly at them. As opposed to, and this is what happens, I think, with a lot of us where we're in the Hollywood Squares Zoom box, if you will, or the Brady Bunch, for those of you that remember them. And we're looking down here. So we're spending the entire meeting looking around at the different squares, or worse yet, looking at your own self. One of my colleagues gave me a tip and they said, I actually put a Post-it note over my picture so that I'm not as likely to look down to it. I position, as I say, the placement of my audience there, right under my screen. Now, not everybody has a desktop and is able to do that. So let's go to our first reality TV show. Let's go to our first demo. And what I want to share with you is how to position it. If you have a laptop, just put it on a stack of books. Here's the lens and test it out. Make sure that you're at eye level. You can also move it a bit forward and a bit back. So that's one tip. Many of you I know as local government electeds are also using iPads. Same thing, get a little stand for your iPad or wedge it between some books and use that lens to look right into the lens when you want to make a point and really create that connection online. What's most important about any of these settings though, including my wheelie chair, is to keep it still. Make sure that if you're putting your laptop on a stack of books, that it's stable and steady and not jumping around and driving people crazy. I had another tip that a colleague shared with me, and she actually puts her iPhone she takes a paper cup and puts a slit in it and sticks her iPhone in there, and then she can use it as an iPhone holder. You can also buy iPhone holders. I have this one. It's actually my selfie stick. I've used it to take pictures of some of you folks as well. So I can use that, and it's a little tripod that you can fan out and set your iPhone on. So that's another way that you can use those different devices. And most importantly, get that lens at eye level. It seems to be the #1 failure of folks when I see them on camera. So let's move back to our screen for tip 2. And this time, it's about lighting. Now, when I started doing the research about how we were doing all this online conversation, one of the things that I did was talk to one of my media contacts, Chris Sohan. He's the news director at Global Television here in Kelowna. And he said the #1 thing that we need to do is get more light on our face. He said too often when they go to interview someone, and the same would apply to a Zoom room, is that we're dark. We have unbalanced lighting. It looks a little bit like this: lighting to the side and full lighting. You think about it. You don't want to make your audience squint. I don't want to make if I'm trying to build a connection, I don't want to make my audience work any harder than they have to. So let's make it easy for people to be able to see us. It also allows all of us to be able to better read people's nonverbal expressions. Are they understanding what I'm saying? Do I need to explain more? Are they in agreement? All those things that we would normally do naturally without even a second breath in a face-to-face meeting, we have to be conscious about doing that online. So what can we do for lighting then? Well, a couple of tips for you. First off, one of the things we can do to get lighting on is use a ring light. And I think that's what we're seeing, a lot of promotion around these ring lights. They look like this. This is just a tiny one, but they clip on and they have lights that are very bright. Sorry about that, folks. And you can put that behind your lens because that's where you want the lighting to be. You want the lighting behind your lens and not behind you. Let me give you some more examples. With the ring light, the challenge with that is if you're wearing glasses, is that's what you see if the ring light is directly in front of you. And I know many of us are wearing glasses. So think about what that looks like. What I also want to share with you are a couple examples here, then, as we move forward, around some samples of lighting. Now, what can we do to build our home office? Well, we can get a ring light, maybe position it. We want lighting behind the lens. If you have a north-facing window, that's great. You don't want direct sunlight because that will bleach out your face. So think about a north-facing light. You can use natural light, but make sure that you're facing it, that it's positioned behind your lens. One other tip I just want to talk about is the hand gestures. We talked about being careful not to get them too close to our screen. I'll talk more about that in a minute as well. But back to lighting. What the pundits also recommend is that we don't mix natural lighting and artificial lighting because they have different temperatures and they can cause us to have an uneven look to our vision, to our persona online. And we want to, again, come across in our most positive way. You can get some lights, very simple. Here's my Canadian Tire special. You can go pick up a light like this and clip that on behind your laptop. I would recommend perhaps one on either side just to balance out the lighting. So super simple. If you want a little diffuse light, you can also attach a little bit of parchment paper to here. Be careful not to start a fire and get it too close to the lens. It depends on how big this piece is, but that's another way that you can add a bit of a softer light as well. Harsh light, and especially, for that high def over 50 is a little tough on us. So I'm a big fan of a different type of light. Because I do this for a living, I actually went to Amazon, and I'll send the link to these as well, and bought these little lamps that, I'm not going to go too bright there, but these little lights to put on either side of my screen. What I really like about these is that I can adjust the volume, if you will. I can adjust the lightness and brightness, the lumens and the kelvins, the amount of energy it's putting out there. So that's another way to get light. I like the balance there between the two. If you have overhead lights, just be careful with them because they can cast shadows. I have an overhead light in this room, but it's positioned somewhat over and behind me. If I go back, you'll actually see how it'll cast some funny shadows and get certain parts of my face in shadow and certain parts aren't, which could be a little distracting and maybe not my best shot that I want to put forward on my lens. So those are some examples of lighting that you can try out. And as I said, I'm going to put some examples for you in the follow-up email that you'll get in a couple days with a list of where those are. So lighting, we covered that off. The next one then is our audio, and that's about Listen Up. Now, this is Dave Ackerman. Dave is a podcaster. He does a podcast that I listen to when I'm stressed out and I can't get to sleep. It's called Sleep With Me. He has these dulcet tones and he's really boring and he puts me to sleep. There's been a number of stories written about Dave Ackerman and his podcast, particularly about where he broadcasts. He broadcasts from his closet, as you can see here with his packing blankets around to mute the sound. So a couple tips for us then around audio. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that we don't have feedback. I know we've all been there. Someone's joined the conference call, and as a result, they've got perhaps their iPhone on and then they've got audio coming in through the speaker on their laptop or their desktop or their iPad. And what happens is they clash and we get that screech, nails on a chalkboard sound. Not a good way to make a first impression at all. It's probably one of the pet peeves that folks have when they're in these meetings. So a couple things for listening up then. You can use a headset. Just a simple headset, if you like. There's a whole slew of them on the market now. If you do use a headset, position it about 1 inch from your mouth. Practice with it, record, see how it sounds, and also practice if you're moving it around. Because what can happen is that every move that you make comes across and interferes with your clarity of your audio, and that's what you want. You want to be able to deliver that clear audio. Now, again, I do a lot of this, so I actually have a professional mic. I have the Blue Yeti. I'm just going to hold this big guy up for me. My little Yeti. It's a Yeti microphone, and I actually have a Chaotica eyeball on it. This absorbs the sound as well as a pop screen, pop, pop, that we use to help get rid of some of those pop sounds in our, and you lean over your slide, you lean over your laptop, and that's what happens. Again, Zoom meetings, hashtag reality TV. So those are a couple ideas for audio. One of the things you might want to think about is having a USB plug-in mic so that you've got it separate from your system, but your system probably works just as well depending on what you're using it for. So a couple of options there. The third one is I want to just suggest to you is to have fabric around you. Now, you don't have to be like Dave and broadcast from your closet, but think about being in a room with carpets. I've got curtains all around me so that I can mute the sound that would be bouncing off the walls. I also have a fabric backdrop that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. And I'm going to take a drink of water now as we move to the next one, which is about your backdrop and rating your room. There is, and some of you may have seen it, this most excellent Twitter Twitter site, pardon me, called Room Rater. It's about Rate My Skype Room, and it's hilarious what they've done. They refer to COVID cabins and hostage videos. Hostage videos being ones where there's absolutely nothing in the background. It's devoid of anything. So here's an example of one hostage video with wingback chair, and they rate them. So in this case, he gets 3 out of 10. This recently gained some publicity on global TV when our very own Keith Baldry was featured on Rate Your Room. In his first one, he got 5 out of 10. And they were a little harsh on him too, saying, Richard Zussman has some of his kids' art up there. Where's yours? So kudos to Keith. He stepped up the game, and they said, wow, after all that stalking, we're going to give you a 9 out of 10. And then he took it to the next level and added some books in there. Much nicer setting. Can you just feel how much more relaxing that is to watch? In fact, that's one of the reasons for what we're going to talk about later, that Zoom fatigue, is all the distraction. So we want to make this as harmonious as possible when we're looking at our backdrops. So those are just some examples that we can share. The other thing people ask me about a lot are the green screens. So a green screen would be a large green screen about the color of the Queen's dress here, yes, I know, onto which we can use those virtual Zoom backgrounds. We can project a picture. What it does is it allows us to be seen as we are and not pixelated around our head, and particularly if we're follically challenged, where there's less of it, less for the image to bounce off of, and it tends to disappear more. We've all seen this where perhaps someone is talking, pardon me, and their hand disappears because they've got their virtual screen on the Zoom background without using a green screen. If you are going to use a backdrop like this, be careful not to wear green as well. And the other thing too, a tip from my colleague Sandy Webster at the City of West Kelowna, she said, be careful about drinking, for example, Perrier out of a bottle, because that will disappear with a Zoom screen as well. So be cautious with green. I don't know what's going to happen on St. Paddy's Day next year. We'll just have to figure that one out. Here's my backdrop. I went for the Anderson Cooper look. I had a media one back there before because I've been doing a lot of video media coaching, but this one was kind of peaceful. And again, I wanted that peaceful background for people who are watching the videos or participating in the Zoom calls. So some things to think about there with your background. Moving on then, let's talk about some of those things that you can do for your background. So as I said before, the books, the artwork, and plants, 3 things that the Room Rater folks say are must-haves for your room. I don't have the depth of that here in my space, so that's why I have this, and I also do it for a living, so I have that as well. And again, thinking about being able to put that full head and shoulders. If you're curious at all, again, just take a screenshot and see what it looks like. so that you can look back and go, wow, okay, I need to adjust that, or maybe the plant needs to move over, or Zoom with a friend and get some feedback on your backdrop and see what they have to say. The other thing too about backdrops is the backdrop behind you, and that is managing the other sounds. Now, this has been really hard for some folks, especially some of the staff and some of our electeds who have little kids at home. So that's been really challenging, and we've seen lots of funny videos of children and nannies Zoom bombing interviews with the BBC professional. So there's a lot of that. We've seen people take their laptops into the bathroom. We've heard toilets flushing, like all that kind of stuff. So think about the outside room. One of the things I think that's most important, though, is to control what you can. That is to turn the notifications off on your computer, turn off the sound on your phones. I have 2 phones in here. I actually unplug them so that they won't ring. I also put a note on the outside of my office door that said, here's what I'm doing, do not disturb, leave a note, and put some Post-it notes out there. So I have a home office, so I actually put it on the outside of my house in case the Amazon guy comes with some more camera equipment. So anyway, so make sure that you have that, and make sure that you have the water that you need to hydrate and go through the call. So cheers to you on that. The next I want to talk about then is there we go, is share screen here, is your wardrobe. And that's about what you're wearing. Now, as we've gone from formal council chambers where we might have worn, for example, a suit and a tie and a shirt, or maybe a button-down shirt and a jacket, or a nice blouse or whatever, we're moving into a more casual environment. So yes, we can be a bit casual, which is all right, but think about what that presents to the public. We don't necessarily want to be wearing, a t-shirt with last night's dinner on it, or if we just came in from gardening, with dirt on it or something like that. There was an article that ran in the Washington Post around the end of March, and it was interesting because it talked about the sales at Walmart, and it talked about the sales of shirts had increased, not pants, shirts. Yes, in this new COVID reality, which is great because we're all working from home now. We still need to dress for success. So yes, a lot of us are dressed on the top, and maybe we have some comfy pants on the bottom. Just make sure that you have some pants, unlike this reporter who is caught, Christopher Reeve's son, Superman's son, caught here in a bit of an uncompromising position. So think about what you're gonna wear and dress accordingly. I have a couple pairs of pants that I like to wear when I'm on calls so that if I do need to get up, I'm still presentable and still respectable. But definitely I look for a more professional look on top, because again, we're trying to maintain our best presence forward. So a little bit more casual is good. What you need to remember is that you're still in a council or board meeting. So what would you wear to that? Keep it at that level. People are still looking to you for leadership. And often, as we know from research that's been done around how to convince people, how to change attitudes, that the majority of how we convey our message is through our nonverbal communication. So think about that. Think about how can we bring our hands into the equation without getting them too close, without trying to go mute and scare everybody. Sneak up underneath and hit your mute button that way. So think about the attire and your body language. Hand language does, our hand gestures do 3 things for us. First off, they get people's attention. Hey, I'd like to talk. Many of us are using this for voting right now as well in council and board meetings. Just the simple raise of hands. Mayor can go around, count everybody's hands, we're done. So they get your attention. The second thing is they help us tell that story. They help us go from A to B and tell the story. And the third is, the research tells us that it actually increases retention. People remember our message more. And wow, that's a pretty powerful gift. So again, that goes back to positioning your lens, not being too close with your hands, being careful with the mute, and using your hands to help you make a point. If your hands are out of screen and you're using them, just be careful that you're not making too much movement up top and too much movement down below, because that can just look a little odd. And the last tip about you and about dressing for success, and most importantly, about creating connection, is to wear your smile. We see folks who are in their resting, I'm going to call it resting mad face. And it's just their natural face. My husband jokes with me all the time. He kind of has one of those. And I say, is everything okay? And he goes, yeah, everything's fine. But it's just his countenance. So think about the fact that people are watching you. Yes, it's a little more energy, but it's important when you're on camera to be seen as your best. The other thing about keeping a slightly neutral to positive look on your face, and even a smile, is that it's contagious. We have these little mirror neurons in the back of our head that help us really bring to life that expression, monkey see, monkey do. It was actually some research that was done at the University of Parma, Italy. And that's where folks who were monkeys that were eating bananas were in a room with monkeys who were not eating bananas, and the same neurons were firing in both their brains, the monkeys who were eating bananas and the monkeys who weren't. Bottom line is your smile is contagious. So think about that at your next meeting, even just to sit there and have your mindful minute and smile and be thankful for where we are, that we're in British Columbia, one of the safest places to be on the planet, in my humble opinion. And I think Bonnie Henry would say that as well. Okay, one last thing I want to talk about with wardrobe. I have one more demo here I want to share with you, and that's clothing. Okay, here's one of my favorite t-shirts. It's a great t-shirt. I love it. I think it would be okay, but it wouldn't be okay. Is that hurting your eyes as you watch this? Yeah, that's because it's got all these stripes. So avoid stripy patterns, checks, things that are too busy that could jump around. Again, if you're unsure, if you want to wear that favorite plaid shirt, if you're unsure, try it out. Do a little Zoom call and record yourself. Play it back and see what it looks like. Simple as that. I tend to go for plain blues. That's kind of my color. Whites are good. Avoid like super dark things because they can make you dark black, dark gray, can make you look a little dark. That reflects up and sucks some of the light out of your face that we're trying to build. So think about those lighter colors here. This gentleman is dressed quite nicely from the top up with his suit. So remember that as you move forward. The next one then, I'm going to go back to our share. Our next point that we want to make is about our gentleman here with his jacket, is about our manners. I saw a term on Polygon that called it vitiquette. Now we've all been there, right? Someone is late entering a meeting, or they're chewing, or, moving their papers around, all that kind of stuff. I bet you have some pet peeves, and I'd like to hear about them. So let's try another poll. What are your biggest pet peeves when it comes to other people's behavior on video calls? And again, the instructions are at the top of this slide. It is text Jan, you can text 37607, and in the message box, type in Jan. But if you're already in, you should just be able to put your answer in. So they are eating, absolutely. Nothing's worse than hearing someone chomp away. Clearly doing something else, that's right. How do you make connection? Not pay attention. Oh, that's a good one. Sleeping, there's another good one. I have to add in my favorite that I saw. Someone eyes show that they're reading. Yep, absolutely. I saw someone flossing in a council meeting. Like, you would never do that in a council. Obviously, talking to someone else, those kind of things. So lots of things. So let's talk about a couple of those things. If you do need to put some notes, you can actually physically get this old school tool out and tape your note or your report right beside where your lens is going to be, so that you're not going back and forth. Especially if you're too close and you're reading and you're coming back and forth like that, can be very, very distracting. It's okay to read. You could simply look down at your notes, and look back up at the camera. Look down at your notes and look back at the camera. Again, this emulates what we're already doing when we're giving a council or board report as well. Drinking, taking a drink and then the gulp after. Yes, mute is your friend. Attention is elsewhere. Talking to someone else. So lots of answers there. Thank you for filling in that poll. And we'll move on then to the next one. As I said, mute is your best friend. You probably have heard stories like this. I mentioned them before. The toilet flushing, the swearing, the honest opinion perhaps coming out, the outside voice versus the inside voice. Mute is your best friend. The important part is to trust your tech. So get in there and understand how fast you can mute yourself. On our video calls, it's as easy as I said, if you're on an iPad or a cell phone, just be able to press your mute button like that, and don't come in to it with your hand to scare everyone, but sneak in behind and have that ready to go. So, and that you're not fumbling around with it or moving your iPad, especially if it's on a stand. So control the things you can. Know where that is, and that's the tech. It's like coming into a meeting, and this is, I think, one of the key differences for our video conference calls nowadays that we haven't had before, is that when people would come in late to a meeting and get settled, we could still be having a conversation. The chair could even get started, and we weren't all having to directly listen to just that one sound. But when we're on a video conference call and everybody else is silent and someone else is shuffling around or getting seated or moving their headset around, it's really disturbing. And again, remember I talked about things that are distracting, that lead to being annoying, lead to being a waste of time, right? And that time is money. You know how precious your time is with the amount of things that you have to do as an elected official. Boy, that's a lot of hours in a day. And then to have to spend extra countless minutes waiting for someone to sign on or get adjusted. So it's about being respectful. I do this with our Toastmasters group. We have been online now. Whenever I jump on the call, I always get there early. Funny, because when I was going in person, I would arrive at the last minute. I'd come screaming in there, find a parking place, come running in, sit down. But it was okay because we were in person, and that was sort of maybe not the best acceptable behavior, but it was okay. It wasn't stopping everyone else. Whereas in this case, it is. That's why you need to trust your tech and make sure that it's working. The next thing then, as I've said already, is that mute is your friend. Make sure that you know how to use that. And the other is, as we saw today too, is, and especially this works very well in council and board meetings, is to have someone who is a moderator. So maybe it's your clerk, your corporate officer, who's ever running the meeting, that they can mute everybody and then unmute people as they need to speak. I know that many of you have already figured this out, but it's a good thing to have in mind, and especially if you're doing meetings as well. Mute is your friend, so yes, remember that piece. The next step, and actually as we're coming into the final big step today, is to own it. There's no question that being on Zoom and having to create that connection through this small lens is tiring on us. It's tiring for a number of reasons. The first is that we are distracted. There's a lot of things happening, so it's pulling our attention away as we're looking to see what's on everybody's bookshelf. I know you've done it. And we're distracted that way. It's about the fact that we're trying to discern so much from our colleagues' nonverbal communication that we would pick up in an instant, in a nanosecond, if we saw them in person. So those type of things are happening in the background, and they're really firing a lot more neurons than we would normally need to use for just a face-to-face interaction or a face-to-face meeting. So in order to do this, you also need to own it. You need to bring your game together with the tips we've talked about before. I'm going to recap those in just a moment, because it is tiring. There's no question about the fact that we're getting tired. Talking to the CAO or emailing with the CAO, I saw this Oliver saw this article. I think many of you are experiencing this Zoom fatigue. And I'm excited to hear, though, that many of you are also now looking at ways to fix it. So what are you doing to clear that? I'm going to clear these responses and we're going to start over again. Clear responses. There we go. What are you doing to combat Zoom fatigue? So this is a poll here, so give that a try. Call instead, absolutely. Shorter sessions, perfect. I love that. I know the shorter sessions, I've switched the media training, which was going, for example, let's say a full day to a half day, but instead of doing a half full day into 2 90-minute sessions, because that's just too long. Even this is probably too long without as much interaction. So shorter sessions, that seems to be popular. What else have we got? Less Zoom time, taking breaks. We don't often take breaks. We schedule these meetings to go from 10 a.m. till 11 a.m. and then we schedule the next one at 11 a.m. We need to be purposeful about making sure that we allocate some time there to have that break. What else have we got? Going black, putting that break in between. Going black would be also just turning your video off. Give yourself a break. Stretching, absolutely. I think one of the things that I think is really key, and for those of you that didn't join on, is also to do some breathing. A couple things I want to talk about in some tips to help you here, but I see there's some things coming up. Drops, going back, hydrate, very, very important is to hydrate and stay hydrated. Water before, wine after, something like that. Staying focused, going for walks, less eye contact. And that's an interesting one. What I'm hearing from folks I'm working with as well is that they're actually saying, hey folks, I'm gonna look down. I want to make, especially for meetings that are ongoing, I'm going to look down. I'm just going to make some notes as I go through this. And you can make that obvious that you're making notes. I'll often in meetings make sure that I'm flashing this, my little notebook here, flashing this and making notes. And it gives me a bit of a break as I write things down, helps me to listen and focus less on what I'm seeing in terms of the Hollywood squares and focus more on what's being said. What do I want to respond to? And especially if you're listening to presentations where, like this, you might not have a chance to drop in and ask a question until the end. I'm making a note about what questions I want to ask as we go through. So taking notes, I think, is a really good tip there as well. Walks, minute, eye contact, 5 minutes between sessions. Lots of good tips there. All right, let's move on then. Tips for FaceTime fatigue. So what do the pundits say about this? What does the research say about this? Well, first off, we might want to multitask. We might want to be like, oh, I can get this done while I'm doing this. And I can do this while I'm doing this. And then next thing you know, I'm moving my papers around. And as someone said earlier, when it comes to a pet peeve, we're not paying attention. The research behind multitasking is quite detailed. And one of the overall themes that keeps coming out of it is that we are 40% less effective when we multitask. So staying focused on the task at hand helps us be better, make a better connection. It helps us be better listeners as we move forward. There's a great Zen expression that I really like, and I use it a lot because I tend to try to multitask. I know, do as I say, not as I do. But it's this: when you're walking, walk. When you're eating, eat. When you're thinking, think. So just a couple different things to think about is do one thing at a time. And that's going to be super helpful in terms of decreasing your stress and making you more effective. Another tip that's been appearing is this piece around breaks. So taking a break, but not just taking a break and jumping on emails, but actually taking a mindful break, like a mindful minute, where you can do something like practice box breathing or combat breathing, as I like to call it. Arjuna, you had mentioned this earlier. For those of you that hadn't signed on, let's try that right now. Now, when you're sitting in your Zoom call, I like to sit with your bum to the back of the seat and your feet flat on the floor, especially if you're presenting. And let's try this box breathing. Sit up straight, pretend there's that string at the top of your head, give it a tug, and breathe with me. We're going to breathe in for 3, 1, 2, 3. Hold for 3, 1, 2, 3, and breathe out for 3. 1, 2, 3. Hold for 3, 1, 2, 3. Breathe in for 3. Hold, out, hold. One more. In, hold, out, hold. There. Don't you feel better? So when you take a break, take a purposeful one. It also helps us be less reactive. And when you're at a counselor board meeting and you're dealing with some pretty high stakes, sensitive issues, it helps us be more focused. It gives us that, it also helps give us that 1 second before we respond, before we jump in with a comment. It allows us to gather our thoughts, and it helps us be less reactive. What this also does is helps make sure that our thinking remains in the front part of our brain, where the executive function takes place, the prefrontal cortex. Because when we get emotional, when we get wrapped up in something, what happens is it automatically jumps back to the fight or flight part of our brain, which is why the box breathing is so important to help calm us down. You can just put your computer on mute and do it at any time. Okay, maybe not with the hand motions, but you get my drift. Happy breathing there. Use video sparingly. You talked about that. Kick it old school, as I say, and call it in. Get on the phone. Does this need to be done by Zoom? Not every call needs to be done by Zoom. Didn't before. Why would it now? So think about what can you do to, when you need to be strategic about using Zoom, and when you can be strategic and make a decision around using an iPhone, or do you even need to meet? So just some tips there to think about it. Now, I know we've covered a lot in this webinar, and I want to leave room for Q&A. Happy to answer any of those. What I do want to say is that from watching what I see happening at other levels of local government and other organizations, I believe that our local governments are doing a fantastic job of mastering this new online platform. Again, when you think about where we were back at the beginning of March to where we are today, wow, what a difference. These tips will help you get through that time until you can be as happy as the city of West Kelowna. And you got to check this out on their Twitter feed. They've got this great little Giphy that they put together about the 2 thumbs up to be happy, back, and distanced. They've got it dialed in for how they're going to allow people to come in and leave as far as making presentations so they can maintain social distance and also provide extra space. They've been using, for example, their arena for their first public hearing that they held a few weeks back. So we've been really innovative, really creative through this whole process. What I can tell you, though, is that I believe Zoom and other video conferencing calls are here to stay, which is why we need to up our game and so that we can rock our next video conference call. We can level our lens, make sure we're making that eye connection. We can get that light on our face. We can boost our audio, make sure that we don't have feedback as we enter a meeting and be that person. We can rate our room. We can think about what's behind us, that we don't have, that where we're broadcasting from, if we're a little too comfy on the couch, or I've even seen people broadcast from their bedrooms, from their bed. Make sure you're looking at, you checking your background to see what's on there, that we're dressed appropriately. Even if it is from the waist up, it's okay to have your dress Birkenstocks on or whatever, it's all right. But think about that from the waist up so that we can put our best foot forward. Minding your manners, remember that we're in this together and that our VidaCat is so critical to making sure that we have a productive and effective meeting, and making sure that some of these little barriers that get in our way of communicating are looked after before we enter. Trust your tech on that one, and mute will always be your friend. And finally, own it. look after yourself, take those breaks, look for those options to video conferencing call that can be exhausting, because you hashtag you got this, and you can now rock your next video conference call. So Zoom calls are easier when everyone dials in. Soon we will be back in the office, which leads to half in person and half dialed in. Any tips to make those easier? That is going to be an interesting challenge. Thank you for sharing that. That's Rod for sharing that question. It's going to be a challenge. And again, what I think is important is in these new realities, and particularly with ongoing meetings like your council meeting, is to say what works for us. It's similar like a code of conduct, but it's how are we going to work this moving forward? Now, certainly you'll have your corporate officer and perhaps IT to provide some assistance, but in terms of being able to do that, there's two things that you need to be able to have. And one is a moderator, and it depends on the platform that you're using. If you're using Zoom or Teams, Microsoft Teams, as to what functionalities you had. As we saw earlier today, Gabby is the host in this webinar. So she has the power to allow people to talk or not allow them to talk on the screen. So there's different moderator functions that can have. I recommend that is a separate person. And then you can have your chair, your board chair, or your mayor or acting mayor, then be the person to go around to the Hollywood squares to say, hey, everybody has something to say. So when it comes to dialing in versus being on Zoom, that's a challenge, because ideally you're using Zoom and visual for the visual, but also for screen share. So I would highly recommend that everybody is at least on Zoom. They can dial in, but as long as they can still see the screen, you should be okay. Again, what works for you folks? Test it, come to an agreement on what that looks like. The next question. So the second question I've got here is, how do you deal with people who continuously interrupt and don't raise a hand? Absolutely, that's a challenge. And again, that's about code of conduct. But if you're talking about a board meeting or a council meeting, there's still protocol that you have. You wouldn't interrupt if you were in a board or council meeting face-to-face. Why is that allowed on Zoom? So you need to set up those ground rules with your team about what's acceptable and what's not. The chair recognizes Councillor Singh, for example, and then perhaps the moderator then unmutes Councillor Singh and then would chime in, and maybe something along those lines. Arjun, please feel free to chime in too if you have any experiences in your group, because I know you guys have an advanced IT group there and an advanced comms team and an advanced council. You've been doing this for a while, so any tips we're open to from any of our panelists as well. So those are some things that you can do to try to stop people. Again, those are behaviors off screen that we want to move on screen. Other questions? Okay, answered live.
I think, can you hear me, Jan?
I can, Arjun, please go ahead.
I was unmuted, so I thought I would just take the opportunity.
Please.
We've been having hybrid online and in-person council meetings, 4 people in the chamber and 5 people coming in from video conference so far. And we're going to try and meet face-to-face now from July on in a bigger room. But I think one of the key things was just the training for everybody to try and get used to the, the different protocols we were using, like how to unmute, how to, put your hand up for various things, how to sort of, so that was kind of, and, our mayor did a very good job, I think, trying to, work through that. But in the beginning, especially, it was, it was challenging, because I know that we all have the same level of comfort or understanding of how to use the technology.
Right. That's a really good point. I know that other colleagues I've talked to as well have done that. So it's that orientation. And the orientation can also include things like, okay, let's see, Mr. Mayor, where are you positioned in your house? Okay, well, maybe we, get rid of that picture, or, that closet door, or the lighting, those kind of things that we can adjust to. Again, because our communities are watching these now. It is a bit of a spectator sport. So great tip there, Arjun. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thanks to everyone for their time and energy. And again, if you have any questions, I'm absolutely willing to share insights. I'll be getting you that tip sheet. I just found some edits I got to make, so we'll have that ready for you. And I'll also provide a list of all the other things that I have in my little studio world here. So thank you so much, and take care out there. And again, just remember, you got this.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.